Hi everybody, welcome to Sunday's IndyCar. I'm Gordon Ross. On today's show we'll be talking about America and the possibility of a new war against Iran for no apparent reason that anybody can understand. Also, Donald Trump and Katie Hopkins interfering in the affairs of London and its current upsurge in knife crime. We'll be talking also about David Mundell and his support for what's his for Gove, sorry, where Mundell is now supporting Gove in the leadership contest for the Tory party. And also I'll be giving a little bit more information about the marching season and how the Independence March has gone in Oban today. So let's first talk about the global situation. And the global situation, as you're probably all aware, is very precarious at the moment. North America is basically accusing Iran of firing torpedoes or sticking limpet mines onto oil tankers passing through the Gulf of Oman. Now, there have now been 5 attacks on ships in the Gulf of Oman, and there are varying reports and accounts of the damage that's being done and who's doing it, and a whole lot of theories about who might be behind it. The facts appear to be this, that the objects which are blowing holes in the sides of the tankers are not torpedoes, because the damage is all above the waterline. Torpedoes are underwater missiles which strike below the waterline of a ship and would usually result in it sinking if they hit it. So torpedoes are not being used. That's the first fact in this so-called attack on these tankers. The second thing is that 2 members of the crew of a Japanese tanker which was struck in the Gulf a few days ago were interviewed and said that, contrary to reports of them striking mines, 2 small fast-moving objects were visible shortly before the explosions on their tanker. So that leads, by a process of elimination, to the idea that they were hit by 2 missiles, which were sea-skimming missiles. Now, there are various types of those. Exocet sea-skimming missiles were used with great effect during the Falklands War and caused tremendous damage to British shipping, including Atlantic Conveyor and HMS. Which one was it? I can't remember the name of the ship, but they were also hit by an Exocet missile. So sea-skimming missiles can be launched from miles away by aircraft circling over the horizon and make their way to the target at supersonic speeds, and a crew of a tanker would have no chance even at spotting them. They move so fast and they fly so low. The holes in the sides of the ship point to small caliber, small sized airborne missiles rather than limpet mines. And all the evidence, or so-called evidence, being purported to show limpet mines being taken off one of the stricken ships by a small launch absolutely mean nothing at all, because you can't see limpet mines being taken on or off the stricken ship. It could well be that this launch had come alongside to see if anybody on the ship needed to be taken off, or basically to assess the damage. Nobody knows, and nobody knows what the timestamp on that aerial drone footage was, or whose aerial drone footage it was, or anything about where it was or when it was shot. So all of this is adding up to a great deal of saber rattling, false flags everywhere here. The Americans are desperate to blame the Iranians for these attacks on these supertankers, but the evidence coming from the crews of the supertankers does not point to limpet mines being attached to ships. Limpet mines would need to be attached to those ships in the harbour. They would need to be attached by frogmen or using remotely piloted underwater vehicles, none of which would be usable once the tankers are underway. You can't sort of zoom alongside a moving tanker in a wetsuit and swim alongside and clamp on a magnetic limpet mine. It just doesn't happen that way. So the stories are all conflicting, and one fact is laughing at another here. But the fact of the matter is, it's very obvious that Iran is not behind these so-called attacks, simply because one of the attacks was on a Japanese tanker at the same time, or on the same day, that the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe was actually in talks with the leaders in Iran over a deal to supply oil from Iran to Japan. So why would the Iranians attack a Japanese flagged ship on the day they're trying to do a deal with Japan? That makes no sense whatsoever. So I think you can safely say that this is a false flag. There are some satirical reports this morning of Iranian passports floating in the water next to the abandoned oil tankers, which, do you know what, it sounds ridiculous, but this is exactly the kind of thing that the American military and the CIA and even the British Secret Service thinks will fool the public if they just leave a passport of the offending country lying around the scene of the crime. We'll all jump to the wrong conclusion. People are not that stupid. So why is America saber rattling around Iran at the moment? It's because Iran has a nuclear program, and it's because Iran has oil, and a lot of oil. Iran, if you look at the map of the Persian Gulf, you will see that there are dozens of US military bases on, shall we say, allies of America on their territory around the Gulf. And they encircle all the way around Iran, almost on every side. There are missile bases and US military bases, Air Force bases, you name it, everything is arranged all the way around Iran at the moment. The Americans are positioning themselves to attack Iran, and at the moment they're just trying to manufacture enough evidence to support going in with military force. The Iranians, to their credit, have said that they will fight to defend themselves if the Americans attack them. Now, whether Iran is developing nuclear weapons, I don't know, but they have got an advanced nuclear program, and that always worries the Americans, and it particularly worries the Israelis because of their proximity to Iran. And that's kind of understandable. The Israelis would not want a nuclear-armed Iran anywhere near readiness to launch a missile at them, because Iran has taken the view that Israel should be wiped off the face of the planet for a long, long time. Anyway, to come back to the subject at hand, so the Americans, in their role as the bosses of everybody else on the planet, are getting ready to do something nasty in Iran. And in the meantime, this morning, President Trump and his little friend Katie Hopkins have been stirring up a pot of trouble for Sadiq Khan in London by again having a go at him in social media, because there have been 2 stabbings in one day in London, 2 fatal stabbings of teenagers. And London's spiralling knife crime is an epidemic that needs to be tackled, but it's underfunded at the moment because of Tory cuts in policing in England. Not something that Sadiq Khan can do anything about at the moment, because his party's not in power and it's unlikely to get into power. Trump loves to have a go at Khan. He loves to have a go at anybody, actually, who's not a white Caucasian male in his middle years. And Katie Hopkins, as you know, is probably one of the most self-promoting and acceptable faces of overt racism in England. And she continues to attract attention to herself. And now she appears to be working with the President of the United States to undermine the Mayor of London. So, again, America interfering in the affairs of another country, and it's the President of the United States who's directly interfering in the affairs of the City of London now. Is there no end to the amount of interference America will attempt? The other thing I notice now is that with the knife crime thing being blown out of proportion, largely by Donald Trump, Katie Hopkins and others, and in the Tory party as well, much to Sadiq Khan's discomfort. The next thing that would happen logically is after Brexit, assuming that we have a hard Brexit and America does a trade deal, that one of the conditions of that trade deal will surely be for a complete relaxation of gun laws in the UK and the permission of vast amounts of American manufactured handguns to be sold to members of the public, ostensibly to protect themselves against knife crime. And this is the way things are done in the United States, remember. So as well as lowering our standards for food, so that we can eat all kinds of rat hairs and insect feces as part of a food chain, not to mention the chlorinated chickens and the the plumped up beef with all its hormones in it, will also, I think, be facing a future where people commonly own handguns, and we will be the 51st state of the USA, because the UK will have no friends left in Europe. It's decided to isolate itself from Europe and go with the America and Israel axis, which is what it's planning at the moment. So we're in a situation where the global outlook is pretty terrible just now for everybody, and America seems to be intent on stirring up as much trouble as possible to provoke some new kind of war. Remember that war makes America a fortune every year, from arms exports to all of these Middle Eastern countries, and also to its private companies who go in to rebuild the countries after American arms manufacturers and armies and military have destroyed everything. It's also been revealed today that the American military is the world's largest polluter of the planet. Everywhere they've been, everywhere there's an American base, it's full of pollution. It's full of heavy metals. It's full of defoliants like Agent Orange. It's full of contaminants, leaked fuel, leaked rocket fuel, peroxide. All kinds of toxic chemicals are left in military bases to be cleaned up. And again, private companies come along to clean these things up. In Iraq, the desertification of Iraq was caused by the Americans' two invasions of Iraq. The second one even worse than the first. Depleted uranium shells fired all over the place, creating health hazards for everybody, including Allied soldiers. America is wading in everywhere, firing off its missiles and its guns at everybody and everything, polluting everybody and everything. It's walking out of all its climate commitments. And so not only is it the world's biggest polluter, it now is also an unapologetic polluter, and an unapologetic, aggressive, self-styled global police force. So we've got an America which is rapidly getting out of hand, and we have Mike Pompeo threatening to bring down the Labour leader as well, another piece of American interference in British politics. All of these things are going to come to pass after Brexit. We're just seeing the first inklings of them just now. Now, while I've got a helicopter flying over me this morning, I'm actually down near the riverside because today is the day of the men's 10k race for cancer research today. So they've got a reasonable day for it, and everybody has started the race at the Riverside Museum, and they're running to finish in George Square today. So go along if you can to support them, and don't forget to sponsor as many runners as possible. Now, as well as the big crowd today for the 10k run, we had a massive crowd in Oban recently for the All Under One Banner Independence March. First of its kind in Oban, I think. In fact, the only one of its kind that Oban has ever seen. And for 7,000 people to converge on a small highland coastal town the size of Oban, takes a tremendous amount of effort by all those concerned. And not to mention the huge numbers of local people who turned out to both welcome the march and to take part in it as well. Of course, there was a small contingent from so-called a force for good. In other words, the evil empire of the United Kingdom was represented by the man in the manky jacket again, with his loud hailer and his Union Jack waving grannies who shout abuse at everybody, as they always do. And you know, their numbers are dwindling every time they show up. And this time they were drowned out by people offering them £20 to wave saltires in a kind of satirical joke about the fact that they had been paying people in pubs to come out and wave Union Jacks last time. Interestingly, the BBC made a colossal error this week and actually ran the story truthfully and said that there were 7,000 people in Oban marching for independence. So for once the BBC has actually reported an independence event. Is this a sign of a change at the BBC? Nah, I don't think so. I think this was a mistake. I think somebody typed up the report and it got put into the online news edition before anybody had seen it. Probably will be altered or changed in some way later on, or the whole thing will just quietly disappear. But anyway, it was interesting that the BBC actually acknowledged it. So, where are we? Okay, so we're in the state at the moment where we're pre-Brexit and pre-American takeover of the United Kingdom. And at this moment in time, the very bold David Mundell, the so-called Secretary of State for Scotland, has now thrown his weight behind Michael Gove, the erstwhile Scot in inverted commas, who's now an English MP and is running for leadership of the Tory party. This is the coke-snorting Gove, the man who not only just tried cocaine but actually did it regularly at parties and events when he was a journalist, and admitting to it before the start of the Tory conference, Tory contest for the leadership, was a bold move. But interestingly, it doesn't seem to have backfired, and although it remains to be seen how many of the pensioner members of the Tory party in the southeast of England would vote for a cokehead like him, he seems to have done his chances no harm whatsoever by admitting this, and admitting that he was wrong, and admitting that he was lucky not to be arrested and jailed for it. I don't know what the statute of limitations is on the possession and use of cocaine, but for a senior politician to admit to taking a Class A drug, not just once, but several times over a period of maybe months or years, 20 years ago, is a hell of an admission, especially when he's expecting to run the country, and especially when at the time he was taking these drugs, he was publicly speaking against drug use and making more stringent and longer jail sentences for those who took the drugs while he was doing the very same thing. So now we have one little gerbil in the form of Mundell supporting this, shall we say, reformed cocaine addict for the role of Prime Minister. Now, David Mundell, he's been photographed a few times and interviewed a few times by the press in an empty building in Edinburgh with nobody in it, which is allegedly supposed to be this new hub of the UK's civil service in Scotland. Now, it's a UK hub which supposedly has a kind of meeting shop, if you like, for the Tories to come up and have their own cabinet meetings in Scotland. It's almost as if they're taunting us. They're saying we're going to come up and have a big public Tory government meeting right on your doorstep, right next to Holyrood. I mean, it is just a provocation, really. But the building's empty. And the stories of the 3,000 civil servants who are supposed to be coming to this building have not materialised yet. The building is still vast and empty. There's no one in it. The only person in it was Mundell himself. And when he was interviewed and asked about his assertion that he would never work for Boris Johnson, couldn't throw the thought of working for Boris Johnson, he then said that he never said that at all, despite the evidence to the contrary, which is clear, and it's on film, it's been quoted many times that he said he would never work with Boris Johnson. Now he's saying he never said that at all. It's rewriting history. And at the same time as he's rewriting history, his friend Ruth Davidson is also not only rewriting history, but rewriting the rules of the Scottish Constitution, and rewriting, in fact not even rewriting, but destroying the devolution bill, destroying the Scotland Act in one breath, and saying that they will just sidestep the whole of the Scottish devolution settlement, that the Tories will run Scotland separately, completely avoiding Holyrood at all, and just fund programmes directly. Now that says that they are not going to abide by the treaty that they signed, that they are going to tear up the Scotland Act, they're going to demolish devolution, and they're going to stage a coup in Scotland, because that's what this is. This is a coup. I'm not the only one who shares this view. Paul Kavanagh, writing as Wee Ginger Dog last week, said the exact same thing, that this is a coup attempt by the Tory government to come to Scotland and set up a parallel government which will override devolution, basically just completely ignore devolution and enforce its will on the people of Scotland, regardless of devolution, without even repealing the Devolution Act, just ride right over the top of it and start imposing their will in Scotland wherever they feel like. And I'm afraid when you do something like that, then you are breaking the Treaty of Union, because the Treaty of Union constitutionally was based on the devolution settlement. And in 1999, when the Parliament opened, so 20 years ago, when devolution started, the Tories didn't like it. But it was democratically arrived at, and it was delivered. Not exactly on time, but it was delivered, and we have a Parliament, and it works, and we have a devolved government. And that devolved government has about 15% of its tax-raising powers. That's all it has. It doesn't have any more power than that. But the problem is, the Tories have lost the political argument in Scotland. They may be able to control the purse strings, but they have zero control over who the population votes for. Their popularity has plummeted from 22% to just 12% under Ruth Davidson. She's lost control of Scotland, and she's lost the vote in Scotland. The Tory support has halved. Many Tories are now switching sides to vote towards independence. An Edinburgh councillor recently switched sides. A Tory Edinburgh councillor switched sides very publicly and has declared herself now as a yes campaigner. She's campaigning for independence, and she's a Tory. And not only that, but she's also disabled. A disabled Tory voter has switched sides. And not only switched sides, but she's a councillor, she's a politician herself. She has realised that the Tories are about to stage a coup, and she doesn't want it either. She realises and said that Tory policies have crippled and damaged disabled people. They have caused the deaths of 130,000 people. And she's not alone. In fact, there have been 2 disabled women politicians from the right who have come forward and said that they now support independence. So the tide has changed. And when it comes to voting for independence, eventually, whenever that is, the Tories don't have a chance, and they know it. They know it full well. So they're trying to threaten Scotland at the moment by threatening this coup, threatening this power grab, threatening this parallel government being forced into Edinburgh against every democratic principle in the entire UK. This is not democracy, this is dictatorship. This is forcing foreign rule on another country. This is the American way. This is, if you don't like what's going on in a small country, you just move in there with your troops and take over. And this is exactly what the Tories want to do with Scotland, because they know that they have now lost the independence battle, and it is just a question of time until the Scottish people vote for it. The Tories' attempts to stop the Section 30 order by denying the Section 30 order, they don't matter, because they can't stop a referendum. All they can do is threaten to disagree with the result of it, because that's all the Section 30 order is. The Section 30 order is a document which says we agree to abide by the result of the referendum that you're going to have. If they don't sign a Section 30 order, that does not mean we can't vote on it. We can still vote to become independent. And if English government refuses to recognise the vote, then we would go to the UN, and we would go to the European Union and to the European Court of Justice, which is a higher court than anything that we possess here in the UK. Even the Supreme Court in England is inferior to the European Court of Justice. Now, they operate in different ways, the laws in Europe and here, very different ways. But we do know that Europe will recognise Scotland's yes vote as soon as it happens. We've been hearing it from diplomats off the record for months now. The paradigm shift in the attitude of Europe towards Scottish independence is now complete. If Scotland votes yes in any kind of referendum that's staged fairly, regardless of what England thinks or signs, the European Union will recognise the new country of Scotland as an individual state. And that means when England throws itself out of the European Union, Scotland would remain. And it would remain as a European city and a European country, until the Scots decide via another referendum or another plebiscite on how they want to relate to Europe. But one thing is for sure, and that is we can still vote for independence, and it doesn't matter whether England accepts it or not, because the rest of the world will accept it. And that would leave England out in the cold and looking extremely foolish, and left pretty much alone in the world with only the Americans, perhaps the Saudis and the Israelis for company. And that's all they would have. Those are the only countries that would really want to trade with them after such an event. Scotland, on the other hand, would have the backing of 28 other European states, and it would have good links with the former Commonwealth countries like Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and other places around the world actually which are not British protectorates but former British colonies. Be happy to trade with us, including China, including Hong Kong, including India, and many other countries besides, who are very well disposed towards Scotland and will remain so. So that's where we're at. Okay, it's a big edition today. Sorry, it's a lot to swallow. And the talk of swallowing, just in finishing today, I just wanted to let you know that I am still alive. You know, rumours of my death yesterday were greatly exaggerated. I had a near-death experience yesterday, a choking incident yesterday, and luckily my wife was very, very fast moving and quick to think. Managed to save me. A piece of food got lodged in my lung, and it took a lot to dislodge it, but thankfully my missus is pretty quick on the uptake. I managed to give me a couple of hefty slaps on the back, which dislodged it enough for me to get a breath and finally cough the obstruction out. But I was going blue, and it was a near thing, and that kind of event really sort of shakes you up. But somebody said to me, in fact many people have said to me in tweets last night and then replies to my Facebook comments last night, that I've still got a lot of work to do, so it's not my time to go yet. My number wasn't up. I've got a lot of work to do, and so have the rest of us, to get ourselves out of this situation. Anyway, that's about it for today. I hope you have a good Sunday. Wherever you are, it's going to be a showery day. I'm not, sort of giving weather forecasts at the moment, but looking at the global picture of weather at the moment, there's a very unusual heat wave over the Balkans at the moment. And there are 3 massive low pressure areas in the Atlantic which are all swirling around over us. So we are getting warm, wet and thundery weather, and I think possibly that's going to be the pattern through this summer. We don't seem to have any settled weather coming our way. Is it global warming? Well, of course it's global warming. All that energy has to go somewhere. It goes into thunderstorms, it goes into building clouds, it goes into heavy downpours which have caused massive flooding in southeast England in the last few days, and I think there's probably going to be more of it. And remember, these floods are going to become more and more common, and despite what Donald Trump thinks and despite what America thinks of climate change, it's happening and we're all causing it, and America will continue to cause it and continue to deny it until they themselves are underwater and New York and Washington get flooded, and then finally they might do something about it. Okay, have a great weekend. Try not to get flooded. Always take a brolly with you wherever you go, okay? And if you're having an Indian meal as I was yesterday, remember, chew your food and drink plenty of water as well. I'll see you all later. Bye bye now.